webinar, of course, is what Arizona homeowners need to know about going solar. So we kind of have a broad sense of what's going on at the federal level and the way that impacts us here at the local level. And I'm going to be really discussing that and the federal tax credit roll phase out rather over the course of the next hour. So just a little housekeeping. If you haven't already, you're going to want to join the audio. I mean, if you haven't already, me saying this is kind of meaningless, but you'll be able to join the audio at the bottom of your screen. And any questions you have, just like all of you are submitting where you're coming from in Arizona in the chat, please feel free to put those questions in the chat as well. I will have people who are helping. So Trinity, who uses they, them pronouns, will be helping in the chat in order to go over any questions and to put some of those questions that warrant more discussion to us audibly. And then I'm also having help from the Arizona Rural Associate, Lauren, she, her pronouns, and she'll be putting in links in the chat as well that are going to be pertinent to you through the course of this webinar. And like I said, this webinar is being recorded, so we'll be sending that to you. So my name is Jess White, she, her pronouns. I'm based out of Phoenix, and I'm the Arizona Program Associate. And so I want to take this moment too to kind of level set and say that 6 months ago, I started with Sun. And prior to that, I was a wildlife biologist, which I bring up to say that I was adjacent to solar, but not in solar. And so if this webinar had happened 6 months ago, I would be exactly where you are now, which is to say no question is a dumb question. So this is a safe space. Feel free to put any questions that come to mind. And I also want to point out that on Thursday from 2 to 6:30, I'm going to have office hours. And during those office hours, kind of in a similar fashion, it's going to be open to whomever wants to join. You just have to register with a link that Lauren will be able to put in the chat for you. And once you do, you can join me at any time during that period, and any questions that you have lingering from this webinar, if we don't cover them all over the course of the hour, you're welcome to join me then as well. And the other piece of level setting I want to bring up is that there are people here who are from Arizona. There are people here from outside of Arizona. There are people looking to get installations, and we have installers who sign up for this too. And the reason I bring that up is really to emphasize that we all come to this from a different place, a different knowledge set, and a different perspective. And as some of the things I bring up can feel a little grim, and maybe it's easy to fall into pessimism, I just really want to emphasize that we are in this together. That is really one of the driving forces of the work that Sun does. And so it can feel really isolating to be thinking about what is the best decision for me and my family, when in reality, everybody here is just trying to find some certainty amidst all the uncertainty surrounding solar's tax credit and the phase out and what that means. So never forget that you are not alone. So that will hopefully be my only soapbox moment for the day. But what is Solar United Neighbors? So we are a vendor-neutral national 501c3 nonprofit. And so basically what that means is that we don't affiliate ourselves officially with any vendor or installer or distributor, because we want to make sure that our driving force is really you. And so in not affiliating ourselves with any particular installer, we're completely unbiased, right? We're giving you information for the sake of itself. We're not giving you information because we have a relationship that dictates that we're telling you certain people or certain services. And then what we really try to do is to help people like you to go solar, join together, and fight for energy rights. And so really quickly, just to touch on our national impact, we are a national nonprofit, although I am based here in Arizona for our Arizona program. And this is just a metric of the many, many people we've helped. It's getting close to 11,000 families across the nation. And we've really done a lot of work to try to expand access and expand the amount of solar power that we are finding in communities. And then specifically for Arizona, the numbers here I really want to highlight are that $14 million have been invested in local communities through the installation of solar, which has helped to create 102 jobs, which is a lot of jobs and critically important from a community perspective. And more than that, through those almost 600 families who've gone solar, $25 million is expected to be saved in energy savings over the course of the next 25 years. And that is a huge number because, again, that $25 million in savings can continue to be cycled in the local economy. And I think something that everybody can agree upon is keeping things local where you can and supporting your neighbors. So how Sun got started, just really quickly, in 2007, Anya Schoolman, our founder, her son basically said, I'd like to go solar. And so Anya did some research and realized it was not as easy as it seemed. And since she was already putting in this legwork to go solar, she decided, hey, let's ask our neighbors, right? If I'm going to do this work, other people can benefit from it too. And so she had her son go from door to door and ask other neighbors. And ultimately, 50 people went solar with Anya, which is how the first co op was started. And so now, and I'll speak about co ops a little bit later. And so now you fast forward to today, and we are in every single state. We have members all across the country, including Puerto Rico. And we've run almost 450 co ops. And so that really gives us reach in so many communities, and we continue to do that in the future. And over 10,000 families have been able to go solar, and we're going to continue to do this work even as things seem uncertain, even next year when that tax credit is no longer in place. So our theory of change, which I discussed before, is to go solar. And what that means is that we want to help you to make the best decision for you. And if going solar ends up being that decision, we want to make sure we're helping you every step of the way. And we also want to help you after you get the system, right? We don't want to just say, go solar, and then if you have any problems in the future, you have no resources. We are always a resource, regardless of what point you are at in your solar journey. And then we want to join together. And this is a prime example of this, right? We are a group of people trying to get information through the noise because we are working together to figure out what is happening, how does this impact us. And after this is done, if somebody asks you or brings this up, now you have this information that you can impart on other people as well. And so we really try to work to build community around solar at the cornerstone. And then last is fight for energy rights. So we do policy work, and we try to implement different policies that create equitable pay in your energy usage. So net metering, for example, which is a 1-to-1 ratio of what you pay the utility is what they pay for any excess you send back to the grid. And things like community solar, which makes solar energy more accessible to renters. So you don't always have to have home ownership in order to access solar. And then, so we're working towards a new energy system, one that is fair and equitable for all. And so the way that works in Arizona, for example, everybody has an equity component to their lives. So, for example, me in Phoenix right now, my energy burden is huge, right? I think this time last year, our energy bill was over $600. And so for people who can't afford that kind of payment, it creates more and more of a financial burden. And that's something that we want to alleviate by focusing on solar and bringing it to people who need it. And vice versa, in Flagstaff, for example, when it's cold in the winter, you have similar issues of your energy burden is higher. And so equity is not a one size fits all, and it impacts everybody throughout the state and every other scale beyond that. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to give you a kind of a primer on what solar is and what that means for you. And then we're going to hop into solar economics, where I'm really going to discuss that tax credit, which is what most of you are here for. And then the last piece is going to be how to go solar in Arizona and some feedback we have based on what we've heard, based on our stance, so that you can make that decision for you. And I just want to pause now to see if anybody has any questions.
Jess, do you have any top of mind thoughts about leasing in Arizona, and then maybe talk about some of our help desk services, or if they want to email us directly?
Yeah, sure. So our help desk is going to have a great roof review program where they're going to be able to take a satellite image of your roof if you ask them to. You have to reach out first, of course, and they can tell you if solar is going to make sense for you based on shading, based on angle of your roof, and some of this I'll get into in the future as well. And so that gives you a better sense of whether solar is going to make sense. And then also we do proposal comparisons. So we really encourage people to not just go with one proposal or only speak to one installer, talk to many, right? Get a little bit more perspective, and then we'll help you to interpret that. And so those questions are going to go to our AZ team email, which Lauren, would you mind putting that in the chat as well, please? And sorry, Trinity, were there other questions?
If you had any top of mind thoughts about leasing, otherwise they can definitely email us to talk about leasing.
Thank you. Yes, so leasing is tricky. There is nothing inherently wrong with leases, but we really prefer to encourage people to go solar and purchase their system instead if you are able to, because you have ownership, and eventually your return on investment is going to be much bigger if you're able to own your system. And then the other is that the devil's in the details. So with leasing, you want to make sure you're really scouring the terms and conditions to make sure that there's nothing in there that's going to adversely impact your solar future and going forward. So for example, if it says there's an adder to where there's a price increase and maybe it's for 10 years, this is the cost of your solar system, but after that 10 years it's going to increase, then you might be planning for that whole 20-year lease period, which is frequently how long that lasts, for this initial cost, which may change in the future. Or maybe the warranty for your labor is only going to last so long, but your lease extends beyond that. And you want to make sure that you're getting the best deal for what your expectations and needs are from that solar system. And when you own the system, you have a little bit more dictation over how that looks. And it's one price, right? There's not going to be an increase because you locked in that rate and you locked in that price when you purchased the system. Okay. Well, if that's it for now, and we'll have other opportunities to answer questions too. I'm going to hop into the next. So this is that solar primer. So how do solar panels work? Solar photovoltaic, also called PV, excuse me, converts solar energy into electricity. And so the way that works is that sunlight is made of photons, and those photons are made of electrons, which are the component of electricity that dislodge when they hit the semiconducting silicon in the solar panels, which then go on to make the energy that powers your home. And you may have heard of solar thermal and solar water heating, but we're really going to be focusing on photovoltaic throughout this. And if you have any questions on the other one, that's not our primary focus, but you're more than welcome to send those to that same AZ team email. Right, so the system components here are your panels. And so your actual panel is encapsulated by many layers of protection. And that is particularly important since this is an investment that you want to make, and damage to the panel itself can lower its efficiency. And so, for example, I know somebody in Prescott who lives on a golf course, and he was saying that he's been hit with golf balls, I believe, 3 times. And while he has seen a 10% decrease in that panel, for example, it's considerably less than what it would have been had he not. And so these solar panels are made in such a way to be truly protective of the technology so that you get that maximum efficiency. And all of your panels in conjunction with one another are called a solar array. Right. And then racking is basically what holds the solar panels to your roof. And so the way it works in this on the left here with the asphalt shingles is that those rails are going to be drilled into your ceiling, and that allows them to be really held firmly so that, for example, if we have a lot of wind, you have much less problems as a result of that wind, because we're really attaching it to your roof to be safe for the system. And so there are many different types of racking. I just wanted to be brief on this one in that there's pretty much a racking for any roof, flat roof, metal roofs, and your installer is really going to be the one who can talk to you about what those options are and what's going to make the most sense for your situation. Right? And then what is a good roof for solar? So there are actually 4 considerations, even though 3 are listed here. The first is going to be roof orientation. So of course, being in the northern hemisphere, the sun is largely to the south of us at almost all times of the year. And so the best aspect for your roof orientation is going to be south facing. Now, if you have west facing roof, that's still really great, because as that sun is setting, you're getting a ton of energy on your panels during peak hours, right? So peak hours for APS, for example, are from, I believe, 4 to 7. And so 4 to 7 during much of the year on a west facing roof, the sun is really going to be shining. East also works well, but basically you don't want a north facing roof. If anybody suggests putting solar panels on a north facing part of your roof, you should ask for a second opinion. Second is you're going to want little or no shading. Obviously, anything that inhibits the panel's ability to receive sunlight and those photons is going to decrease your energy production. And so you can, of course, cut trees. Living in Phoenix, I would never do that. So preferably you wouldn't have trees that are blocking it at all, or you can trim it to where some light still dapples through. And there are other ways that we can deal with that, which I'll talk about in a moment. The next is that preferably you want all of your panels to be in a contiguous space. I have a gabled roof, so I've had people say, oh, we can put solar panels here, but the most ideal circumstance is going to be one large space because you can do racking right there instead of multiple racking. And then the last is also going to be the age of your roof. So you're going to want a roof that has at least 10 more years of life at the very least, truly, because if you are going to have to replace your roof during that period of 25 years minimum where your solar system is going to be on your roof, it's going to be that much more expensive to remove the solar array, re-roof, and then install the solar array again. And so you really want to make sure your roof is has enough life to it that that's not going to be something you need to consider. And then in the event that roof mounted solar doesn't work for you and you have enough ground space, you might want ground mounted solar because it doesn't rely on the roof at all, right? Downside to that is that you have to build the infrastructure to hold it in the first place. And so there's costs for steel that are additional to what you would normally pay for rooftop solar. And there are extra costs associated with trenching since it's going to be further away from your utility box. You'll have to trench to get that line to your utility box in order to get it to your house. And this is kind of what I was talking about before in terms of shading. So the string inverter is a really simple inverter, and an inverter is basically a translating technology that turns your direct current, which is what the solar panel is producing, into alternating current, which is what your house is able to use and what powers your technology and appliances. And so the simple string inverter will only be as strong as its weakest link. So if one panel got considerable shade, all other panels would be basically operating at that shaded panels level, whereas microinverters are at each individual panel. And so that is a more complicated system, but if you had one shaded, that means that every single panel would be operating at its own functionality. And so your installer is going to have some advice on what to do in these cases. And then, of course, your electrical panel is where your electricity is routed to. And so it's usually a pretty simple connection. And most home systems don't need an upgrade, but that's something that your installer can discuss with you as well. So some important terminology here, and you'll hear this throughout this presentation, and I'm sure you've seen it many, many times on your utility bill, but the first is going to be kilowatts. And so that's a measure of energy. So you can see this picture on the right. There are 12 panels, each panel being 400 watts. You multiply 12 by that 400, and you get 4,800 watts, or what you actually hear systems refer to as 4.8 kilowatts. And so your kilowatt hours are going to be power, and power is energy over time. And so the amount of power that you're producing every hour, for example, is a kilowatt hour, and the amount of power that you're using and you're purchasing from the utility is the same thing. And that's what you generally see on your bill. And in Arizona, our average size system is usually about 7 to 8 kilowatts, leaning more towards 8 kilowatts. And this can vary depending on your needs as well. Not everybody opts for that, but we can talk about that a little bit later too. So some more important terminology, as I discussed, your panels in conjunction with one another are called an array. Your solar inverter is that box that basically translates that direct current to alternating current to make it usable by your house. Your electrical panel is going to be the brain. And so that's where that energy all goes so that it can be directed to the correct place, whether that's inside the house to power your fridge or your washing machine, or back towards the utility meter because you have excess energy. And so that utility meter is going to be bidirectional, meaning you're going to be measuring input from the utility for your usage and output for instances where you have an excess of solar energy, and in which case you're going to be selling it back to the utility. Okay. And then I briefly touched on this before, but to expand on what I was saying, net metering is a policy that Arizona had up until 2017. And it basically says that for every kilowatt hour that you purchase from the utility, you're compensated at the same exact rate as you're purchasing it for any kilowatt hour you're selling to the utility. And so it was a 1-to-1 ratio. And in 2017, that changed to what's called the RCP, or the Resource Comparison Proxy. You've probably heard of it as an export rate. And basically, that is a much lower price that utilities are saying your electricity is worth. And so, for example, with APS right now, that's about 6.7 cents per kilowatt hour. And actually, that is a perfect turning point for this. So, just to emphasize how much lower that is than what you're paying for electricity, for example. And apologies for those of you who have either TEP or SRP or some other perhaps rural electric cooperative. We're happy to discuss those with you more one-on-one, how these plans look. But APS has the most simple, and so that's the one I chose. So while you're getting paid 6.7 cents for the energy that you're sending back to APS, if you are looking at on peak during the summer, for example, you're paying 34.4 cents. So there's a very big gap there. And this is just to emphasize that the plans can be pretty complicated, and it's something that you want to consider because not every plan is made the same. SRP has more plans and TEP has more plans still, which is part of why they weren't mentioned. But basically, as you're considering when your energy usage is happening, you're considering this cost. So whether or not you're using energy between 4 to 7 p.m. in the summer, you're going to be paying this cost. But if you decide to opt out of doing higher energy need activities during that time, you can do it during off peak, like cleaning your laundry, etc. Then you're going to be paying 12.35 cents across the board. And so that is a much more manageable price and only twice what APS is paying you. There are time of use with demand charge plans with all three of those utilities, and that demand charge is more complicated because it chooses a time period where you're using the most energy over the course of the whole month, and then it multiplies that by this modifier. So for example, if my highest use as an APS customer was 4 kilowatt hours, then I would multiply 4 kilowatt hours, since we're in the summer, by 19.59. So that would be almost $80 as my demand charge. And so most people opt for this easier time of use plan on the left. And then just as an example bill of what that looks like, your bill is going to tabulate how much on-peak energy you used, how much off-peak energy you used, the fixed charges that nobody can get out of, right? And then you're going to get a credit for how much you sent back to the grid based on that RCP or export rate. And then that'll ultimately lead you to your total. And then this is going to vary widely depending on the season too. So here in Phoenix, for example, my bill would be considerably less in like mid to late spring because there's plenty of sunlight and my energy use isn't too high. But in the summer, I am using way more energy because I can't live without my air conditioning. We're in a long-term relationship. And so that ends up being considerably more expensive. Right? So batteries as a system component to your solar array. If you have the power go out and you don't have a battery system, your solar array also turns off. So I think there's a common misconception that if you have a solar array, you're going to continue to have power even if the energy is out. Unfortunately, there is a safety mechanism, well, fortunately for people working on the lines rather, at the inverter, and that turns off your system so that you're not at any point sending energy back to the grid, which of course is a safety issue for people who are working with that high voltage line. If you want to have power during outages, you'll need to get a battery because it islands you. And so you're still able to produce energy to that battery and then have that battery power your house. Whereas you can't do that if you don't have the battery. And kind of an example of what this system looks like is that in this case, there's a 13.5 kilowatt hour battery bank. And when it's fully charged, in the event that there's a day without power, then that would be able to, for a 24-hour period, power things that are necessary. So your refrigerator, some outlets, maybe your modem, so you still have access to the internet, and then a small window air conditioner. In the case of Phoenix, for example, you could put somebody in a room and have at least power to that. But you can also elect not to power certain higher energy use appliances, and that will help you preserve some of that power in the battery. And the value of this, of course, is that if you have frequent utility outages, that gives you more, excuse me, assurance that you're going to have energy no matter what. If you have critical loads, so if you have medical technology that you simply cannot go without, you still have the ability to utilize that, and you don't need to have a generator necessarily to do so. And of course, emergency and disaster preparedness. And another value, and something that's kind of up and coming, is called a DPP program. And so DPP, it stands for Distributed Power Plant. Legally in Arizona, it's also referred to as a virtual power plant. So if you know anything about Arizona policy, that's going to be the term you've heard. And basically, that is a network of small, local, decentralized energy sources saying, like, everybody is their own very small power plant. And when those work in conjunction, you're keeping energy and energy empowerment in place rather than needing to transmit. For those of you who are in Tucson, for example, if you're getting energy from the Palo Verde plant, which I guess you wouldn't be because that's APS, that's a bad example. But that transmission costs money to keep the infrastructure, and also it loses efficiency over time because some of that energy is lost. And so having this virtual power plant is really beneficial to communities at the local level because that power is already in place. And so APS, SRP, and TEP are all launching a battery storage program in the near future. And basically what that looks like is you can opt in to certain events and you can also opt out. And by doing that, your utility is going to take some of the energy from your battery that you determine during peak hours. So basically using you as that power plant to power your neighbors. And so you would be giving this power during the events that you opt into. And at the end of each period, so there's going to be 2 periods per year for each of them, if I'm not mistaken, you're going to be given a lump sum to basically thank you and compensate you for the energy that you're creating. And so that makes it a little bit more accessible to have batteries because you are getting extra compensation compared to what you would have gotten before. I will say one consideration about this is that because it's taking from your batteries during peak hours, you might end up using a little bit more energy from the grid during that. So your monthly bill might be a little bit more expensive, but it's going to be more than offset by that lump sum that they give you twice a year. But if your bills are already excessive, that might not be a program that you'd like to join. And we will be hosting a webinar on August 28th with APS to kind of describe what this is for APS customers. And so keep your eye out for that. Right. And then we have this battery storage homeowner's guide. And so that'll kind of go over in much more detail what battery storage is and how that would benefit you. Great. And then to quickly, because I'm taking too much time, sorry, y'all, go over some frequently asked questions. We have 3 warranties that we generally see. The first is going to be labor. And so it's going to be different depending on your installer, but generally speaking, it's an average of 10 years, I want to say. And so the labor warranty covers any costs associated with repairs during that insert period here. So the installer is going to be the one to front those costs because that's part of their warranty. There's also parts. So those are usually much longer, like a 25-year warranty, for example. If at any point during that 25 years your parts stop working or a part, then whoever owns the distributor of that part. So for example, Tesla would be on the hook to replace that or to pay for the cost to replace it. And then the last is power production, which guarantees a certain percentage of efficiency compared to when it was first installed over the course of a certain amount of time. So, for example, a 25-year warranty at 90% would say that after 25 years, we guarantee your panels will be producing 90% of what they were producing on day one. Homeowners insurance, will my policy go up if I install solar? And so if it does, I would suggest looking into other insurance carriers because there's not really any reason to. It adds value to your house, and your solar array actually protects the roof. And so it can lengthen the amount of time that your roof is able to go without needing repairs, and repairs on roofs are obviously a big insurance cost, so that solar really can help lengthen the amount of time there. Maintenance, solar is not entirely maintenance free. You're likely to have an app, and so you're going to want to monitor your production, and every few years you're going to want to have somebody inspect that to make sure everything's operating the way it should. How long do systems last? We generally say at least 25 years. There are people who went solar way, way back in the day and have, 40-year, maybe that's not way back in the day. Now I'm thinking of my age, but 40-year systems. And so it is guaranteed generally to be at least 25 years under most circumstances. Will HOA allow solar in my home? So in Arizona, HOAs are not legally allowed to stop you from having solar, but they may have some caveats or require you to put solar in a way that isn't visible from the streets, similar with historic districts, but we would suggest you talk to your historic district office to kind of get better details on that. All right. Any questions? It looks like there might be a lot.
Do we have any information available right now on if the DPPs will make it reasonable to have a payoff time for batteries, or is that something we'll have more information about in the future?
That would be something more in the future. I think the current timeline is APS and TEP are hoping to start that program kind of in the next quarter. But right now, we don't have all the details. So we're really reliant on them to kind of figure that out. And for TEP and SRP, this is kind of a pilot project. So I think that even they don't necessarily know how much, but they're confident that it's going to offset more than it potentially costs. Like it will be a net benefit for people who opt in. Okay, was that it?
So far, so good.
All
But
right,
folks,
awesome.
definitely feel free to drop it in the chat.
Thank you. So, solar economics. I am going to start with this slide because I really want to instill some optimism in our current solar economic outlook. Solar is a great investment, tax credit or otherwise, and this graph really shows that. So, where it used to be at least $100 per watt in the 70s, we're now looking at a closer average to about $2 to $3 a watt. Some 2 to 4 perhaps is better. That's a huge change, and innovation continues to drive the industry, and so we're hopeful that that's going to continue this trajectory. It's dropped 73% even from 2010, and so there is hope, right? Like even as things fluctuate in the solar coaster, as I've heard it called many times, there's always going to be reasons to be hopeful and why solar is an amazing investment for many reasons, especially in light of how utility bills increase. I know that, for example, APS has requested, I believe it's a 14% increase in the coming years. And this is on the tail of them doing that several times over the past few years, just as an example. And so those prices continue to rise. But if you get solar, you're able to stabilize your payment and hopefully offset a lot of that bill, if not cover it almost completely. All right, so breaking down the cost of solar. Solar, as it stands now, is smallest amount goes to labor. Usually, an installation for a residential roof is going to take a day or two. The next largest is going to be system components, and that's just purely the technology. So, your inverters, your solar panels, and everything else affiliated with the system itself. The most expensive piece to solar is the soft costs. And so what that means is the administration fees for the installer and the cost for having salespeople and marketing. And so our solar co-op model, which is a group buy bulk purchasing, is us saying, hey, here's a group of people interested in going solar. Can you make this cheaper for us? Because we're basically getting rid of some of that salesperson component. And through that, they're able to save costs and then send those costs to you basically. And so that is one of the ways, like I was talking about before, about how not everything is grim, that we're able to continue to reduce the costs over time by bringing the average cost per watt down in having a group of people, and why we emphasize so much the join together piece. So Arizona solar incentives, you get a 25% state tax credit up to $1,000. So not a whole lot of money, but we've heard nothing at all to indicate that this is going away. In addition to that, there's a property tax exemption. So if your solar array increases your tax value of your home, you're not going to have a similar increase in your tax liability. So what you're paying before and immediately after your solar panel is going to be the same, even if that solar panel or array installation made your house worth more. And then last, for solar installations, there's no sales tax. So that does save someone on the costs too. And now we get to the federal tax credit. So obviously, we've heard a lot about how this federal tax credit is going to be phasing out at the end of this year. And so that tax credit was 30%. It's not a rebate. I want to emphasize that, and I'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. It is truly just a credit. So it goes every year when you are doing your taxes, you would have that 30% credited against your tax liability. And historically, you've been able to roll over any excess. And so I want to pause really quickly before I get deeper into that and say that the solar industry is going to continue with or without this tax credit. I know that for me as an individual, this makes me a little anxious because I could really use that 30% tax credit. And so it impacts people absolutely, and I don't want to diminish that. But for people who are concerned about the viability of solar, there's no need to worry about that, right? Like many utilities are investing in solar because they want to have a cleaner, more economical ability to produce power. And it is, by every metric I've seen, accounted to be the cheapest source of power as well. So solar will continue, innovation will continue, and that should hopefully lead somewhat into the hope going forward too. So, some considerations to take into mind when you are thinking about whether or not you're going to get the tax credit if you go solar. We recommend your installation be completed by December 31st of this year. And so, technically, the one big beautiful bill changed the wording to say that you need to have your system paid in full by December 31st. But we are not confident necessarily that the IRS will codify that into tax code. And so if that doesn't happen, then there may be withholdings, right? Like you want to be as conservative as possible in this, or at least that's our suggestion to you to make sure that there's no reason for you to apply for this tax credit and not get it. That said, it is now July 29th, and so there are some timeline considerations to think about as well while you're making this decision too. A lot of people are deciding to go solar right now because they know that tax credit is being taken away. And so that's going to alter the city's speed at processing permits. Timing for the utility to interconnect your system as there's more of an influx of these requests, your installer's availability, and weather and holidays. So all four of those components are going to make it take a little bit longer. To what extent, we can't say, for you to ultimately get to go solar. And so we want to make sure that we're not telling you, oh, go solar now and you're guaranteed to get the tax credit. Sooner is going to be better, full stop. If you're really trying to get the federal tax credit, you want to basically be doing this legwork now. We've heard mixed reviews from different installers as to when their hard line is. So basically, one installer might say, if you sign a contract on this date, you're guaranteed, but after that, we don't feel confident we can guarantee that. And so that is widely variable across the spectrum of installers. And that's part of why we can't say definitively what that actual hard line is. But the sooner you go solar or sign a contract at the very least, the better. That said, rushing is something that can pose some consumer protection issues. So we don't want you to jump into it per se. We have resources that I'll talk about in a little bit to help you go through that process so that you're not doing it alone and you're not having a proposal that you feel, oh, I have to go right now, that will potentially hurt you in the long run, because we're going to be there beside you to help you and guide you as well. Another consideration is the fact that this is a tax credit, not a rebate. And so you have to have taxable income in order to be eligible for the tax credit at all. And so that means, for example, if you're on disability or Social Security, you wouldn't be able to use this. Although I did hear somebody say a workaround is that you could move money from a 401k into an IRA, in which case you would be taxed for that income and then not taxed when you take it out of your IRA in the future. So that's something to consider, but that is a difficult scenario to navigate, and we are not tax experts. So I want to make sure to emphasize that we highly encourage you to talk to a tax expert so that you can get better guidance on that. And to that point, actually, I know that next week there's going to be a live forum for questions through TurboTax where they specifically discuss the implications of the One Big Beautiful Bill. So that might be something where you can get a tax expert's opinion to better guide your decision. And similarly, a question to bring up to them too is the tax credit rollover. So in this example, you can see that if, for example, I had a $6,600 tax credit, but I only owe $3,000 in federal taxes, I am not going to be using this $3,600 next year. I would have that historically rolled over to the following year. So my 2026 taxes, which I would be paying in 2027, or where that $3,600 would go. Because there's not clear guidance, it's not guaranteed. We can't guarantee at the very least that there is going to be a continuation of the rollover because we don't know when the IRS is going to codify these changes. It might be as late as next year. And so that's obviously, if you're waiting for that to be codified and you're waiting until next year, you will have lost the ability to get the tax credit. And so that is something to keep in mind too. In this example, for example, if I lose this $3,600 that I would have otherwise rolled over, that turns this tax credit into only $3,000, which ends up being about a 13% tax credit. And so a co-op, for example, we consider an average of 20% savings. And so a co-op, in that case, if the rollover isn't there and you can't use all of your tax credit, it would actually be more economical. And I realize that there's a lot of nebulous moving parts here. And so I do apologize. Hopefully it's kind of bite-sized right now. And I'm happy to discuss any questions as well. But this is an APS example as well, because each utility has different rates of return on your investment for going solar. So even without this tax credit here, all is not lost. So if you look down here at the bottom, what otherwise would have been a net profit of $23,800 or $34,500 respectively is still pretty substantial because it's going to instead be $20,000 in the first example versus almost $28,000 in the second example. So even if you take out the tax credit over the course of that 25-year theoretical minimum lifespan, you're still going to have a huge return on your investment. That said, because this modeling is based on APS, I will say that we generally ballpark APS's average return on investment to 7 to 9 years. SRP is usually somewhere closer to 12 to 14. So not every utility and solar experience through their utility is created equal. And this is another reason why I wanted to have this office hours, because I can really talk about some of these nittier, grittier elements so that you have a better understanding too. And then, of course, the options for new solar customers are go solar now versus go solar later, and some considerations as to why you might choose one over the other. And perhaps is a little misleading given the number of components on each. But with go solar now, I ordered these in most likely. So if you go solar now, you're going to save more money on your energy usage sooner because you're going solar sooner. So that's guaranteed. Likely less impact from tariffs. So right now, as I understand it, tariffs are on pause, but there's no guarantee that if you decide to wait until this time next year, for example, tariffs won't make solar technology presently more expensive. So going solar has the benefit of you probably will have less impact overall from tariffs. Your chance to claim the tax credit, because there is a a period of wait for the utility, for the municipality or city to approve your permits, the installer to get it installed. The sooner you go solar, the better your chance to claim the tax credit. Over time, that will decrease until after a certain point that we can't determine, unfortunately, for y'all and for me, as somebody who wanted to go solar this year. There will eventually be a tipping point where, based on current expectations, that's no longer the case. And that was likely to be sometime before December 31st for signing a contract, even though it's supposed to be until December 31st. And then last is the potential to lock in a better export rate. APS changes their export rates, and so does SRP September 1st. So that's a very low likelihood that you'll be able to get your system installed before that changeover. TEP is a slightly better chance because TEP's rate changes October 1st. But even still, the amount of time it's going to take for the permitting, et cetera, is likely to be longer than what the month/2 months that would be respectively. And then for going solar later, we do have those co-op models, those bulk purchasing models where we join together and we say we're interested in solar, and we get bids from installer who tell us this is the cost, right? This is going to be generally, like I said, 20% cheaper. And so if that tax credit doesn't roll over, it might be a better investment. And then the solar market will eventually move closer to equilibrium after everything going on and the uncertainties, particularly after this year when there's questions as to what the future looks like, right? And so I like to learn by example. And so I'm going to take my sun hat off for a moment and talk to you about my considerations when I was making this decision because I wanted to go solar this year. In a perfect world, I would have had the co-op and the tax credit, but that's not the way the world works. And so for me, and like I said, this is not Sun's official stance by any means. And everybody in this webinar has a different experience, different priorities. So please don't take my considerations as anything but one perspective. And in fact, I would encourage you to talk to people, talk to somebody who went solar, talk to an installer, talk to a tax professional. Like everybody's going to have a little bit of a different perspective. But for me, because I generally pay less than $3,000 in taxes every year. And so with that in mind, since I'm not confident in that rollover necessarily based on the current guidance, I would save more money with going solar with the co-op. Also, from a qualitative perspective and not just quantitative, so, money talks, but it's not everything. I personally don't like feeling like I've been backed into a corner. And so I'm sure all of us have experienced a salesperson, not necessarily in solar, but who said, if you want this price, you have to lock it in now. And as soon as I feel that, I dig my feet in. And so for me, unfortunately, based on all the things that I'm thinking of, I'm probably going to wait to go solar until I can guarantee a co-op model so that I have a better chance of a discount based on my own personal tax liability being too low to have that tax credit mean as much as it could without that rollover. And so now that I've belabored that point, I will quickly go into how you can finance. So there's different financing, and this is kind of where leasing comes into play too, in that you don't necessarily have to get a loan. Well, you probably would with the leasing is a monthly payment, but so are loans. And so if you own it, you're going to lock in that rate now, and you can do that through a home equity line of credit. Refinancing, probably not given current interest rates. And you can talk to like a local credit union. And then usually installers will also have financing options. And the benefit of that is that it's built in. They're already connected with this financier. And so it is more seamless than if you were to go and get your own loan yourself. That said, similar to getting different proposals from different installers, you're always going to want to see what the different options are there so that you have the best and hopefully cheapest experience. All right. I'm going to pause again to take some questions. I know that this is all a lot to take in, folks, and I really appreciate you bearing with me as we just ride that roller coaster into the sunset. Oh, and as Trinity said, you can also pay in cash if you have that ability. Trinity, were there any other questions in the queue?
Some specific questions, but like we said, unfortunately, we're not tax advisors, so we definitely recommend reaching out to a one with the tax credits to see what you can claim. Things are developing as we go. So I apologize that I might have overcomplicated things in the chat. So please email us if you have questions after this webinar. But we have seen some folks talk about how even if your system is not necessarily placed in service by the end of the year, that you may be able to still claim the tax credit for what you have paid. So for cash purchases, let's say you paid 50% of your system, you may still be able to claim the tax credit for that percentage of your system. But we will continue updating the Solar United Neighbors website and sending updates as we learn more.
Okay, and that's fair. And to that effect, since we're not tax credit or tax experts, we can't say whether or not that's the case. But I will say that, kind of like I was alluding to before, with different perspectives, some people have more of an appetite for risk. So you have potentially more risk, but maybe more reward by saying, I trust in this tax credit as it currently stands, and I still think I'd be able to get some back. And that's going to be very much a personal, individualized decision for you. All right. How to go solar in Arizona. So basically, the what's next. Like I said before, if your main priority is that 30% tax credit, you're going to want to go now. You want to take the time to find installers who are reputable, certainly, and we can help you with looking over your proposals to make sure that it makes sense. So, for example, like I was talking about before, if we see an installer propose a lot of panels on the north side of the house, we're going to have some questions, right? And we're going to guide you in why we have those questions. And then we'll talk about the price per watt based on like the average of each system costs and which one has better technology, things of that nature. And so through that, which we do through that AZ team email, we're going to be able to make sure that you feel supported, that you have your questions answered, because like I said before, people facing is the name of our game, right? Like we love solar. We want people to have solar, but we want to have people to have solar because it benefits them. At the end of the day, we're doing this for you, and we want to make sure that you have every opportunity to make the best decision and to help guide you along that way. Alternatively, if you don't feel like the timing's right, or you're like me and when you feel rushed, especially in a decision that is potentially as much of an investment as solar, then definitely consider our co-ops instead, because you'll have similar access to these resources. We educate you. We'll have different webinars like this. You'll be able to do it as a group, so other people will be going solar alongside you, and you can feel some measure of confidence in that. And we review their bids deeply to make sure that we're showing you exactly what installers are saying. And through our co-op model, at least the traditional co-op, you get to choose which installer as a group you all go with. And then, yeah, let Sun help. So, in addition to that proposal comparison that the Arizona team can help you with, there's also that help desk roof review to figure out if solar is even right for your roof. And then there are some recommended preferred installer lists. We don't recommend certain installers because we are vendor neutral, but APS, SRP, and Solar Energy Industries Association, so SEIA, they all have people that they have vetted personally, and they can basically say this is a, based on whatever metrics, reputable installer, and so you can feel more confidence going solar with them. That said, no industry is perfect, and obviously there are some considerations for bankruptcy potential in the future. Like, I don't want to say that that's going to happen with every installer by any means, but it's something to consider when you're looking into installers too. Like, how big is this installer, or how likely do I feel like they can weather the storm of the solar coaster? And so that is something that we think about as well during our bid reviews, is to make sure that every installer has as much potential to stay liquid going forward, so that that warranty, for example, continues on for you as well. Now, in the event that an installer that you have used goes bankrupt, which, like I said, does happen sometimes, unfortunately, There are 3 third-party warranty organizations, and some installers will even offer that as an option where you can opt in and pay a certain amount of money each month so that your warranty is never in question, regardless of whether or not a installer goes bankrupt. So that's something to consider too, from a personal protection of your investment, your asset, which is that solar array. Oops, I jumped ahead earlier when I was talking about the co-op. But why join a solar co-op? So you get that bulk discount, you get our support, you can do it as a group, and you can be part of a growing solar movement, right? Like I said before, the momentum of solar may be a moving target, but it's not going to stop. And so as we build this community around solar and the way it benefits us as consumers and people who have to use energy, particularly in Arizona, where it's crazy weather swings, regardless of where you're at in the state, then we can continue that momentum. And I think that's really powerful. And last, I know we have 2 minutes, so I'll try to be brief, but not too brief because I think this is really important. There is still hope. Like I was saying before, solar continues to be the cheapest, cleanest, safest, and most democratic source of energy. And what I mean by that is that nobody has a small power, like coal power plant in their backyard. Nobody has a nuclear reactor, but some people have solar, right? So this is something that is accessible to far more people than the alternative. And so we have more power over the decisions that allow us to continue having solar. There is leasing. I know that we discussed it before, but leasing will continue to have that 30% tax credit based on our current guidance because it's considered commercial. So you're leasing with a commercial installer, and they're still able to take that tax credit for them until 2027 and thus offset the costs that you're paying for your leasing terms. That is something to consider too, that there is some amount of cheaper access if you lease in 2026, for example, if for whatever reason you can't afford to go solar and purchase your system through some form of financing, cash or otherwise. But like I said, and for anyone who may not have been here at the time, devil is in the details. Make sure you look at those terms and make sure it works for you so that you're not blindsided in the future if something changes or a service that you expected, such as your labor warranty, drops off, but you still have an extra 10 years of that lease past when that drops off. And then there's Solar for All. And so Solar for All is a federally funded program, but Arizona already has the funds. And so basically it allows for either a cheaper or potentially a fully funded. I think they're still working out the details of what that is, but it makes for people who are income qualified solar more affordable. And so that is expected to be rolled out next year. So if you are income qualified, for example, that is something that you still have access to, and that guarantees at least 20% of your energy usage will be covered. Okay, and to continue on that, there's still areas where we can influence change too. I'm a firm believer, especially having worked at Sun now for these past 6 months, that we have power, right? We can work together to influence change that makes it cheaper and more accessible for people to go solar in the future, and even benefit those of us who already have solar. So net metering, for example, we can work to bring net metering back. And that is not going to be an easy thing to happen. And I want to temper expectations on that because there are a lot of people to whom that doesn't benefit. And so there is an uphill battle there, but we still have power, right? We can still tell our cities, like, there are ways that we can lower the permitting costs, such as a free app called Solar Plus, for example, and how that can influence people at perhaps a smaller scale. But if you're paying less for the permitting, you're paying less overall. And then innovation, solar is going to continue to get more efficient, and hopefully that's going to continue to make it cheaper, and community solar. So that is a facet of Solar for All, is creating a community solar situation, which is presently not possible in Arizona based on legalities, but is something that could be forthcoming and will help more people to be able to get this cheaper energy source to support them. And so, last, you can always work with us too. We would love to have more people working with us. And that could be something as simple as distributing flyers to help inform your neighbors, to something as big as becoming an advocate and thinking about and working towards things like what I was talking about. And for those of you who already have, such as those of you who talk to your Congress people about how you didn't want the solar tax credit removed, thank you. I really appreciate your efforts. There's more work to come, but it's worthy work, and we love working with you and alongside you, and we would love to continue that as well. And last, thank you. There's probably a couple more links if memory serves, but to remind you, we're going to have that office hour again, 2 to 6:30 this coming Thursday, July 31st. And so feel free to register, and any questions that you want to dive deeper into or that weren't answered, I would love to answer them for you, because at the end of the day, the future of solar is you. So thank you for being here, and I will now open it up to any questions. Oh, I just noticed one about the Northern Arizona Co-op. So for those of you who were planning to join the Northern Arizona Co-op, or any of you who knew about it already, unfortunately, based on the timelines and uncertainties and discussions between Sun and our partners, we collectively decided that unfortunately now wasn't the time. There's just so many moving parts, and trying to relay that and also work with installers when they're already pretty burdened with how many installations they're doing already for people who are going solar solo. We couldn't make everything make sense the way we wanted to, and we wanted to be as clear and transparent with our co-op members as possible. And with everything in flux, it was considerably harder to do that. So we made the unfortunate decision to postpone until next year, which I know is very disappointing, and we are all collectively very sorry that things are the way they are. But we have every intention of continuing to help you as if this were a co-op model. And so we're going to still have Solar 101s like this in the future. We're still going to have more office hours over the course of the next month. And basically, we're going to take every opportunity to make sure you're supported like we would if we were having the co-op, without having the confusion or the concerns of promises made that weren't necessarily possible to keep, depending on all those moving parts. That was a lengthy way to say I'm sorry we're not having the co-op. And I appreciate everyone's patience as we navigate current times, because I know that that's really, I would be very sad. I am sad because there's no co-op model here for me in Phoenix either. And so I truly commiserate. I see, is there a solar co-op in Southern Arizona? We are anticipating having one in the future, but that timeline is also a little bit unclear. And so I can't promise you when that's going to be. It is intended to be sooner than later, but whether or not the tax credit will be possible is still the same question exists as what I was discussing with the Northern Arizona Co-op. So currently, I can't guarantee a timeline. We anticipate having a solar co-op in all of our usual places. It's just when that timeline happens is what's up in the air.
Jess, would you like to mention some places that we've had co-ops in the past?
Oh, yeah, of course. So we have had several in Tucson and the general Tucson area, and we've had, I believe, 5 in Northern Arizona. So primarily Sedona and Flagstaff, as well as Coconino County. But we also have expanded it to some extent as needed for those who are joining from Cottonwood, for example, or from Prescott. And we had one in Yavapai where, it was really focused on more rural communities in Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, etc. And so we also, Lauren, as I mentioned at the beginning, just joined us as our rural associate. And so we're hoping to scale up those co-op opportunities to where we're reaching more areas in the state, so that there's more access to solar for people who may not have otherwise had opportunities to join our co-op before, given capacity issues.